Caleb Turner had spent the whole day repairing a broken fence on his small ranch, and the sun was already dropping behind the far mountains when he finally tied his horse and began walking the last mile home. The desert air was cooling fast, carrying the smell of dust and sage. Caleb enjoyed this time of day because everything grew quiet. But on this evening, something felt different. As he walked down the narrow trail, he thought he heard a soft sound, like someone breathing hard or struggling. He stopped and listened again. The wind moved lightly through the grass, and then he heard it, a faint, tired whisper. It was not an animal. It was human. He followed the sound until he reached a shallow ditch near a cluster of rocks. At first, he saw nothing but dry earth. Then, a small movement caught his eye. 2 figures lay there, curled up as if too tired to move. When he stepped closer, he realized they were 2 young Apache girls, not much older than 18 or 19. Their clothes were dusty, their hair tangled, and their bodies shaking with exhaustion. One tried to lift her head, but fell back immediately. Caleb felt his heart tighten. Tension between settlers and Apaches had always been high. Many cowboys would turn around and leave, pretending they saw nothing. Others would become nervous, fearing an ambush. But he was not that kind of man. He walked closer and gently asked, "Are you hurt? Can you understand me?" The older girl opened her eyes slowly. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Water," she whispered. The younger girl tried to reach toward him but couldn't lift her arm. Caleb quickly removed his small canteen and knelt beside them. He tipped it slowly so they would not choke. They drank in small sips, their eyes closing in relief as the cool water touched their lips. When they finished, the older girl whispered, "Thank you." Caleb nodded and asked, "Where is your family?" The girls looked at each other helplessly. The younger one finally said, "Far. We walked. Too long. No food. No water. We cannot stand." The words were broken, but Caleb understood enough. They were lost. They were too weak to keep moving, and the night air was already growing cold. Leaving them alone would be the same as letting them die. Caleb looked around the empty land stretching for miles. There was no one else. No tribe. No riders. No help. He knew what he had to do. "I'll get you to my cabin," he said gently. The girls stared at him with tired, uncertain eyes. They had every reason to mistrust white men, but they were too weak to argue. Caleb lifted the younger girl first. She was light, almost weightless from days without food. He carried her carefully to his horse, then returned for the older sister. She tried to walk but stumbled, so he supported her with one arm while guiding the horse with the other. The journey to his cabin felt longer than usual. He walked slowly to keep the horse steady, occasionally checking if the girls were still awake. They leaned against each other, half asleep, barely understanding what was happening. By the time they reached his small wooden cabin, the moon was rising, casting a silver glow across the clearing. Caleb pushed open the door and brought them inside. The warm smell of wood and the faint smoke from the fireplace filled the air. It was a simple place, a single room with a bed, a stove, a table, and a few chairs. There was not much, but it was safe. The girls stood weakly near the doorway, unsure what to do. Caleb spoke softly, so they wouldn't feel afraid. "You can rest here. Sit down." The older girl helped her sister to the chair but almost fell herself. Caleb reached out to steady her, and she allowed it, too tired to resist. He quickly poured a tin cup of water and handed it to them. They drank slowly, as if every sip mattered. He then opened his small storage cabinet and took out a piece of bread, a few dried apples, and the last bit of smoked meat he had saved. He warmed them slightly over the stove and placed the food on the table. The girls hesitated at first, unsure if they were allowed. Caleb nodded. "Eat. It's okay." They ate with small, careful bites, as if afraid the meal might disappear if they rushed. After eating, The younger girl's eyes began to close again. The older one looked at Caleb with a silent question, as if wondering where they should sleep. Caleb looked at his bed, a simple but clean place near the corner of the cabin. He made his decision without hesitation. "You take the bed," he said. The girls shook their heads, embarrassed. The older one whispered, "No. Your place. We sleep on floor." Caleb smiled slightly. "You both can barely stand. You need the bed more than I do." He pulled out one of his extra blankets and placed it on the floor near the stove. "I'll sleep here. It's warm enough." The girls exchanged a tired glance. They understood his kindness but didn't know how to respond. Slowly, they walked to the bed. Caleb turned away, so they wouldn't feel watched. He added more wood to the fire, giving the room a warm orange glow. When he turned back, he saw the two sisters lying on his bed, curled up under the blanket he had given them. They looked peaceful for the first time since he found them. Caleb sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, watching the fire crackle. The cabin felt unusually quiet. Even though he had guests now, it somehow felt calm. He thought about what might have happened to their family. He wondered if they were looking for the girls right now, or if they had traveled too far to return. He also knew that helping them could bring danger. If their tribe found out they were in a white man's cabin, the misunderstanding could easily turn violent. But Caleb did not regret his choice. Not even for a second. Sometimes, doing what was right meant risking something. And tonight, it meant giving two exhausted strangers a safe place to breathe. As he lay back on the floor and pulled the blanket over himself, he heard a soft whisper. It was the older girl. She said quietly, "Thank you for not leaving us." Caleb didn't answer right away. He simply nodded, even though she couldn't see it in the dim firelight. The younger sister murmured something in her own language, a soft sound filled with relief. Caleb closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the fire wash over him. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. Maybe their family would arrive. Maybe trouble would come. Maybe nothing at all. But for now, the night was quiet. The girls were safe. And that was enough. By the time the fire settled into glowing embers, Caleb had fallen asleep on the wooden floor, never imagining that within a few days, more than 100 Apache warriors would surround this very cabin, all because of the simple kindness he offered tonight. The morning sun rose slowly, sending soft golden light through the cracks in Caleb's cabin walls. He woke earlier than usual, his back a little sore from sleeping on the wooden floor. For a moment he forgot why he was there, wrapped in a blanket beside the stove. Then he heard a quiet breath from the corner, and remembered the two Apache sisters sleeping in his bed. He sat up silently so he wouldn't disturb them. They were still asleep, curled closely together, their faces peaceful for the first time in days. Caleb smiled a little. Whatever long journey had brought them here, at least they had rested well. He stepped outside to get water from the small barrel near his fence. The morning air was crisp, and the sky a bright, clear blue. As he filled the bucket, he kept thinking about what might happen next. He knew the girls couldn't stay long. If their family was out there searching, they might arrive at any moment. And if the town found out he had Apache girls in his home, some men might start trouble even though he had done nothing wrong. Caleb did not worry about himself much, but he worried about the girls. People in town were quick to judge things they didn't understand. When he returned inside, the older sister was awake. She sat up slowly, as if she didn't want to move too fast. Her eyes looked more alive now, less tired. Caleb smiled gently and said, "Good morning." She nodded, her voice still soft. "Morning." The younger sister woke a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes like a sleepy child. Caleb made them breakfast, warm bread, a little butter, and some eggs he fried on the stove. The sisters ate quietly, still getting used to being safe. After they finished, the older girl tried to help wash the dishes, but her legs were still shaky. Caleb shook his head and motioned for her to sit. The girl hesitated but finally sat down. The younger sister watched everything with soft curiosity, trying to understand this man who treated them with care even though he didn't know them. Later that morning, Caleb realized he needed to ride into town for supplies. He was short on food, now that there were 3 mouths to feed. Before leaving, he told the girls gently, "I'll go to town. I'll be back soon. You stay here. It's safe." The older sister looked nervous. "You go alone?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Yes. Just a short ride. I'll return before noon." They both nodded slowly, still unsure, but they trusted him enough now not to panic. Caleb saddled his horse and rode toward the small town 3 miles away. The ride usually felt calm, but today he felt uneasy. He wondered how people would react if they saw the girls or heard about them. Gossip traveled fast, especially in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. When he reached the general store, he tied his horse and went inside. Old Mr. Howard, the storekeeper, greeted him with a nod. "You're here earlier than usual, Caleb." "Needed more supplies," Caleb replied. He grabbed flour, beans, dried fruit, and a bit of medicine just in case the girls needed it. Mr. Howard raised an eyebrow as he watched him. "You expecting guests?" he asked with a curious smile. Caleb kept his face calm. "Helping some folks who were tired on the trail," he said carefully. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want trouble. As Caleb stepped outside with his supplies, he noticed 2 men watching him from across the street. Their eyes followed him closely. Caleb ignored them at first, loading the supplies onto his horse. But he soon realized the men weren't just curious, they were talking quietly and looking toward the road that led to his ranch. One of them, a rancher named Miller, finally called out, "Hey, Caleb, heard you brought some company home last night." His voice carried a sharp tone, the kind that wasn't friendly. Caleb turned slowly. "Just helping someone who needed it," he said. Miller stepped closer, smirking. "Folks said they looked Apache." The other man frowned. "That true?" Caleb stayed calm, though his heart beat a little faster. "They were exhausted. I couldn't leave them out there." Miller's smirk faded into a cold look. "Well, you better be careful. Bringing Apache into your home is asking for trouble. Their people don't forget things like that." Caleb didn't argue. He simply mounted his horse and said, "Everyone deserves help when they're in danger." Then he rode off, leaving the men staring after him. The ride back felt much longer. Caleb knew the rumors were already spreading. People in town always talked, especially when it came to anything involving the Apache. Their stories were rarely kind. When he reached the cabin, the girls were outside, sitting in the sunlight. They stood quickly when they saw him, relief washing over their faces. Caleb smiled gently. "Everything's fine," he said. "Just got food." But the older sister sensed his uneasiness. She stepped closer and asked softly, "Town, bad, man, and..." Caleb shook his head. "Not bad, just talk." He didn't want to worry them, but he couldn't hide the truth completely. "Some people don't understand your tribe. They think wrong things." The older sister lowered her eyes. "We know," she whispered. "People fear us." Caleb took a slow breath. "Not all people. Not me." The girls exchanged a quiet look, grateful for his kindness. For the next few hours, Caleb taught them simple English words, using small objects in the cabin: cup, fire, table, window. The girls laughed softly when they mispronounced something, and Caleb laughed with them. Slowly, the heavy feeling from town faded. He learned their names. The older sister was named Anya, and the younger one was Tala. They told him their family had been traveling to join relatives in another camp. But their group had scattered during a storm, and the sisters had walked for days trying to find the trail again. By afternoon, both sisters looked much healthier. Their faces had more color, and their movements were steadier. Tala had enough energy to help Caleb sweep the floor, while Anya helped fold the blankets. They moved quietly. But there was a calmness between them now, the kind that grows when strangers begin to trust one another. But just as everything felt peaceful, a fast-riding wagon passed by the cabin on the road. The driver glanced sharply at the sisters, standing outside. He didn't stop. He rode on, dust rising behind him. Anya looked uneasy. Caleb noticed it immediately. "It's all right," he said. "He won't bother us." But the truth was uncertain. The wagon rider was from town, and once he reached there, he would surely talk. As the sun began to set, Caleb prepared dinner. The girls helped, smiling more freely now. They had found warmth and safety in his small cabin. But outside, the world was already buzzing with rumors. Rumors about 2 Apache girls being kept by a white cowboy. Caleb didn't know who would come next. Maybe nothing would happen. Maybe someone would ride out to question him. Or maybe the sisters' tribe would come looking for them. He didn't know that the third answer was already true. Far beyond the hills, 3 Apache scouts had already found the sisters' tracks mixed with the hoofprints of a single horse. They followed those tracks toward Caleb's ranch. And once they saw the cabin in the distance, they wasted no time turning back to report what they had found. Caleb continued eating dinner with Anya and Tala, unaware that soon, the whole world around him would change. The next morning began peacefully. Caleb woke before the sisters and stepped outside to check his animals. The sky was clear, and the air felt gentle. For a moment, everything looked normal. Quiet, calm, safe. He fed his horse, fixed a loose fence board, and carried firewood inside the cabin. Anya and Tala were already awake, helping each other braid their hair. They smiled shyly when they saw him, looking much healthier than before. Caleb cooked breakfast, and they all ate together. The girls spoke more English now, trying their best to repeat new words Caleb taught them. Their laughter filled the room softly, and for a brief time, it felt like any other morning on the ranch. The fear, the rumors, the uncertainty, none of it pushed into the cabin. But outside, far beyond what any of them could see, trouble was already moving closer. By mid-morning, Caleb decided to finish a few chores behind the cabin. Anya and Tala followed him outside, enjoying the sunlight. They walked around slowly, stretching their legs after days of weakness. Tala picked up a small wildflower near the fence and held it carefully, admiring its bright yellow petals. Anya stood beside Caleb, watching him repair a wooden trough. Everything felt almost peaceful. Then Anya suddenly froze. She stood still, staring toward the far ridge. Her eyes narrowed with a kind of sharp awareness Caleb had never seen before. Tala stopped too, gripping the flower tightly. Caleb turned toward the ridge. But at first, he saw nothing. Only the long stretch of land, the waving grass, and the distant hills. Then he saw a small cloud of dust rising in the distance. At first it was faint, like dust from a single horse. But the cloud grew larger, wider, darker. Caleb's heart tightened as he took a step forward. Anya whispered something in her Apache language, and Tala answered with a trembling voice. Caleb finally understood what he was seeing. It was not one rider, not 10, not 20. It was a massive group riders spread across the ridge in a long, sweeping line. Their horses moved fast, their shapes darkening against the bright sky. The dust behind them rose like a wave. Anya grabbed Caleb's arm, her breath shaking. "Family," she whispered. "Our people. They came." Tala's hand trembled in hers. Caleb swallowed hard. He knew enough to understand this situation was dangerous. A misunderstanding could happen easily. If the Apache riders believed he had harmed the sisters or taken them against their will, they might not wait for explanations. The riders moved closer, the thunder of hooves starting to vibrate through the ground. Caleb's cabin trembled slightly, and even the horses in his corral grew restless. Anya stepped forward, her eyes wide with worry. Caleb nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what was coming. "We have to show them you are safe," he said. But the sisters already looked frightened. They understood their father's temper. He was known for his strong leadership and protective heart. If he believed his daughters were hurt, he would react quickly and fiercely. The ground began shaking rhythmically. The riders were close now, less than a minute away. Caleb stood straight and held his hands slightly raised to show he had no weapon. He didn't know if it would matter, but he had to try. Anya and Tala moved to his sides, holding his sleeves tightly, as if afraid he might be taken from them. The sound grew louder, filling the air with the pounding rhythm of hooves, the sharp cries of riders calling to one another, and the heavy breath of horses. Then, in a sweeping motion, the Apache riders surrounded Caleb's cabin. It happened so quickly that Caleb barely had time to blink. Dozens upon dozens of warriors formed a tight circle around the clearing. Their faces were stern, their eyes sharp, and their weapons ready. Bows were drawn, arrows aimed, lances pointed forward. The horses stood tall and alert, snorting and stamping the ground. At the front of the circle, a tall, broad-shouldered man on a black horse rode forward. His hair was long and tied with beads. His expression was fierce, his dark eyes full of fire and fear for his daughters. He was Chief Naicha, the father of Anya and Tala. The moment the chief saw his daughters standing beside a white cowboy, his entire face changed. His jaw tightened, and the muscles in his arms flexed. He gripped his bow tightly, ready to react. Anya stepped forward immediately, raising her hands. "Father, we are safe!" she cried out in Apache. "He saved us!" Tala echoed her sister's words, her voice shaking. "He helped us. He gave us food and rest." But the chief did not lower his weapon. He glared at Caleb with suspicion and anger. His voice boomed across the clearing as he shouted something harsh in Apache. A few riders moved in closer. Arrows pointed straight at Caleb's chest. Caleb did not move. He kept his hands raised and spoke quietly. "They came to my door weak. That's all. I helped them. I didn't harm anyone." The chief did not understand his words, but he understood the tone. The sisters continued talking rapidly, explaining everything: the storm, the days without food, how Caleb gave them water, how he slept on the floor so they could rest. Still, the chief's anger did not soften immediately. He gestured sharply, and several warriors dismounted and ran toward the cabin. They pushed open the door and rushed inside, searching for any sign of harm or mistreatment. They checked the blankets, the bed, the food, the water basin. Anya held tightly onto Caleb's arm. "They believe you hurt us, but you didn't," she whispered fearfully. Caleb stayed still. "Tell them again. They need to hear it." For several long minutes, the warriors searched and whispered among themselves. The chief watched everything with tense eyes. Caleb could feel many arrows still pointed at him, ready to fly at the slightest mistake. Finally, the warriors returned to the chief and spoke quietly to him. They told him what they saw: the untouched blankets on the floor, the food, the signs of care, the neat bed the girls slept in. The chief listened without changing his expression. Anya stepped closer to her father and placed her hand gently on his arm. "Father," she said softly, "this man protected us. If not for him, we would not be alive." Tala nodded with tears in her eyes. "He is good. Please, believe us." The chief looked at his daughters, then at Caleb. His eyes no longer held the same fire, but he was still unsure. He paused, breathing heavily, the tension thick in the air. Caleb lowered his hands slowly, showing no fear. "I only did what any person should do," he said quietly. "They needed help. I gave it." The chief didn't understand the words fully, but he understood the feeling behind them. The warriors around the circle waited for his command, attack, or stand down. The chief finally inhaled deeply and lowered his bow. The arrows around the circle lowered as well. For the first time since arriving, the warriors relaxed slightly. The danger was not completely gone, but the worst moment had passed. Anya let out a trembling breath of relief. Tala whispered a quiet prayer. Caleb stood still, thankful that reason had won over fear. But none of them knew that the real test was only beginning. The chief would not let this matter go easily. He wanted answers. He wanted truth. And he wanted to understand the man who had sheltered his daughters. The sun climbed higher above them, casting long shadows across the land as the chief prepared to question Caleb face to face, in front of all 150 warriors. The circle of Apache warriors remained tightly formed around Caleb's cabin, their eyes sharp and unreadable. Even though their weapons were lowered now, the tension in the air felt heavy. Caleb could feel every heartbeat like a quiet drum inside his chest. He knew the danger had not passed completely. The chief had lowered his bow. Yes, but only because his daughters begged him to. He still needed answers. He still needed to understand what had truly happened. Chief Necha sat straight on his tall black horse, staring intensely at Caleb. His expression was strong and serious, showing years of leadership, battles, and responsibility. Anya and Tala stood close beside the cowboy, still holding onto his sleeves like they feared someone might pull him away. Their father watched this carefully, trying to read their feelings. After a long silence, the chief gave a single command in Apache. 2 warriors stepped forward and motioned for Caleb to approach. They did not touch him. They only signaled. Caleb understood they expected him to walk forward alone. Anya grabbed his arm immediately. "Be careful," she whispered. "Father is strong, and sometimes strict." Tala nodded nervously. Caleb gave them a calm smile. "It's all right," he said softly. "I will speak the truth. That's all a man can do." He stepped toward the chief slowly and respectfully. Every rider's eyes followed him. The ground beneath his boots felt hard and dry, and the wind carried the quiet sound of horses breathing around him. When Caleb reached the chief, he stopped at a respectful distance. The 2 men looked at one another. 2 different worlds. 2 different people, brought together by a moment neither expected. The chief spoke first. His words were in Apache, deep and powerful. A warrior beside him translated slowly, his voice steady. The chief asks, "Why did you take his daughters into your home?" Caleb answered without hesitation. "Because they were weak. They were hungry. They needed help. I found them alone, in the desert." The translator repeated the words in Apache. The chief listened with a serious expression, then spoke again. He asks, the warrior translated, "Why you gave them your bed and slept on the floor?" Caleb looked directly at the chief. "They were too tired to stand. They needed rest more than I did. I only did what any decent person would do." The chief's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to read Caleb's soul. He spoke again, his voice lower, more thoughtful. The translator repeated. He asks, "Why you did this, without knowing who they were, without knowing if danger would come?" This question struck deep. Caleb took a breath and answered honestly. "Because they were human beings in need." The translator spoke, the Apache words slowly. A few riders looked at Caleb with softened expressions. Kindness like this was rare. The chief remained silent for a moment. Then he raised his hand and gave another command. 3 elders rode forward, older Apache men, known for wisdom. They were respected deeply within the tribe. The chief wanted their judgment. He ordered them to inspect the cabin again, but this time carefully, slowly, with the eyes of men who knew how to read truth from shadows. They dismounted and walked toward the cabin with quiet, steady steps. Anya and Tala watched them nervously, holding each other's hands. The elders entered the cabin. They inspected the blankets, the water basin, the small stove, the leftover food. They noticed Caleb's blanket still on the floor beside the fire, where he had slept. They saw nothing hidden or suspicious, only signs of care and respect. They stepped outside after several minutes and returned to the chief. Everyone waited. The horses made small, restless noises, but the warriors remained silent. One elder spoke softly to the chief in Apache. The others nodded. Their words confirmed the truth. Caleb had treated the sisters with respect and kindness. Chief Naisha listened closely, his face slowly changing from suspicion to thoughtful calm. When the elder finished, the chief let out a long breath. The heavy line between his eyebrows softened. He turned his eyes back to Caleb and spoke a long sentence in Apache. The translator repeated it slowly. The chief says, "You acted with honor, more honor than many men show." Anya let out a relieved sigh. Tala's shoulders relaxed. Caleb nodded respectfully, grateful the truth had been understood. But the chief wasn't finished. He motioned for Caleb to step closer. The cowboy obeyed. The chief looked him straight in the eyes, studying every detail of his face. Then he spoke again through the translator. He asks, "If you fear his people?" Caleb shook his head. "No, I don't fear your people. I only feared a misunderstanding." The words were translated. A few warriors exchanged glances, impressed by his courage. The chief asked another question. "Do you expect anything in return for helping the girls?" Caleb answered firmly, "No, I expect nothing. I helped because it was right." The translator shared the message. This time, several riders nodded with respectful approval. Another question came. "Would you have protected them even if you knew they were the daughters of a great chief?" Caleb thought about it honestly. Yes, because at that moment, they weren't the daughters of a chief. They were just two young women in danger. The chief heard the translation and finally relaxed completely. His stern expression softened. The fire in his eyes dimmed into something that looked almost like gratitude. Anya and Tala stepped forward, tears in their eyes. They spoke softly to their father, explaining again how Caleb found them, how he gave them food and water, how he let them sleep safely. Their words were full of emotion. The chief listened to them with a softened heart. Then, in a sudden gesture, the chief dismounted from his black horse. His boots touched the ground with a quiet thud. He walked toward Caleb slowly. Each step measured. He stopped inches away. For a moment, Caleb wondered what would happen next. The warriors watched with sharp attention. The air held its breath. Then Chief Naicha extended his hand. It was a gesture of deep respect, something not often given to a white settler. Caleb took the chief's hand firmly. Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was understanding between them. The chief spoke again, and his voice was softer now. The translator shared the words. The chief says, "You are a friend to his people." A wave of relief washed over Anya and Tala. They both stepped closer, happiness filling their faces. The warriors slowly lowered their stance, no longer tense. The horses relaxed too, sensing the peace in the air. The chief looked at his daughters, and then at Caleb once more. He gave another command, and the warriors slowly widened the circle, loosening their formation. Caleb had passed the test. He had proven himself not through strength or weapons, but through honesty and kindness. But the chief was not finished yet. He still had one more decision to make, one that would surprise Caleb more than anything else that had happened that day. When the chief released Caleb's hand, a calm silence spread across the clearing. The tension from earlier had melted away, replaced with something completely different: respect, relief, and a strange kind of curiosity. Many of the warriors had lowered their weapons completely now. Some even softened their expressions, watching Caleb with quiet interest. It was not common for a white cowboy to earn this kind of trust from a powerful Apache leader. Anya and Tala stood beside their father, finally safe and comforted. But they kept glancing at Caleb with grateful eyes, as if they still could not believe how everything had turned out. Anya wiped a quiet tear from her cheek. Tala gave a small, shy smile. Chief Naiche raised his hand, giving a loud command in Apache. The riders around the cabin shifted, creating more space. The chief clearly wanted to speak more to Caleb, but this time, without the weight of threats or fear. Caleb waited respectfully, hands resting calmly at his sides. The chief gestured for Caleb to follow him toward the center of the clearing. Caleb stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance. A translator stood nearby to help when needed. The chief began speaking in a calm but strong voice, and the translator repeated each line so Caleb could understand. The chief says he has traveled many lands, the translator explained. And he has seen many people. But he has seen few men who help strangers without wanting something in return. Caleb listened quietly, humbled by the words. He says your heart is good. And he does not forget kindness done to his daughters. A warmth spread through Caleb's chest. Helping the sisters had been the right thing to do. He never expected thanks. But hearing these words from a respected chief meant more than he could express. The chief continued speaking. His voice grew stronger. The translator repeated, he says that he wishes to show you gratitude in the Apache way. With honor. Not just words. Anya and Tala looked at each other with surprised eyes. They knew what their father meant. Caleb did not yet. The chief turned toward his riders and raised his arm. A few warriors rode forward carrying long bundles wrapped in decorated cloth. When they reached the chief, they dismounted and opened the bundles carefully. Inside were beautifully crafted gifts, items only given to someone the tribe respected deeply. One warrior held out a handmade blanket filled with bright patterns. Another held a carved bow, polished and decorated with feathers. A third carried a small leather pouch filled with healing herbs. These were not ordinary gifts. These were items meant to honor someone who had showed great bravery or kindness. The chief nodded to his warriors. They presented the gifts to Caleb with calm, respectful expressions. Caleb accepted them slowly, almost unsure. No one had ever honored him like this before. Why give me so much? Caleb asked quietly. The translator relayed the question, and the chief answered with a powerful voice. Because, the translator said, you protected two people who mean everything to him. He cannot give you any less. Caleb bowed his head gratefully. Thank you. I am honored, he said sincerely. The chief then stepped closer, speaking even more softly now. The translator continued. He says he wishes you to come to his camp as a guest, to share a meal with his people. This is not offered to many outsiders. Anya gasped softly. Tala smiled brightly, happy that her father was offering something so rare. Caleb blinked in surprise. An invitation like this was far more than he expected. He nodded respectfully. I would be honored to visit. The chief gave a satisfied nod, pleased with his answer. He then turned and spoke to his daughters softly. Anya and Tala listened carefully, nodding slowly. Their father wanted them to return to the tribe, but he also wanted to thank Caleb properly before they left. But the moment felt too short for the sisters. They looked at Caleb with quiet affection. Tala stepped forward first and said softly, You saved us. We not forget. Anya followed and added, Our father sees your heart. We are safe. Because of you. Caleb smiled warmly. I'm glad you're safe. That's all that matters. Anya looked down for a moment, then back up at him. Maybe we come visit, she said gently. Tala nodded eagerly, whispering, Yes, we will. Their words warmed Caleb more than anything else that morning. The chief then gave another command. The warriors mounted their horses in smooth, practiced movements. The clearing filled with the sound of hooves and soft leather creaks. Anya and Tala moved toward their father's horse, preparing to leave with the riding party. Before climbing up, Anya turned and gave Caleb one last, long look, a look filled with gratitude, respect, and something tender. Tala waved sweetly from behind her sister. Caleb raised his hand in return, a small smile touching his lips. The chief mounted his black horse once more. He gave Caleb a firm nod, the kind given from one honorable man to another. Caleb nodded back. Then the chief raised his arm and let out a powerful call across the clearing. The warriors responded, and the entire riding party began to move. Their horses stepped in unison, forming a wide formation as they headed down the long stretch of land beyond the cabin. The dust they created rolled like a gentle wave behind them. The sound of their hooves echoed for a long moment, but slowly faded into the distance. Within minutes, the Apache riding party disappeared beyond the ridge, leaving Caleb standing beside his cabin, holding the gifts that marked him as a respected friend. For the first time, the clearing felt peaceful again. Caleb let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the entire morning ease slowly from his body. He looked at the empty path, where the riders had gone. He wondered where the sisters were at that exact moment, probably riding beside their father, telling him more about the days they spent with him at the cabin. The quiet returned, but it no longer felt lonely. Something had changed. Forever. Caleb carried the gifts inside carefully. He placed the blanket on his bed, admiring its bright patterns. He hung the bow on the wall with respect. He put the small pouch of herbs in a safe corner of his shelf. His cabin suddenly felt different, warmer, fuller, touched by a piece of another world. As the days passed, Caleb returned to his routine. But every now and then, he would glance at the ridge, half expecting to see riders returning. Sometimes he imagined Anya's calm smile or Tala's bright excitement. He wondered if he would ever see them again. He didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, as Caleb was fixing a fence near his barn, he heard a familiar sound, a group of horses approaching. He turned quickly, expecting trouble. But when he saw who it was, he smiled instead. A small group of Apache riders approached, carrying peaceful expressions. Among them were Anya and Tala. Their faces lit up when they saw him, and behind them rode a few familiar warriors, part of the promise their father had made. Caleb understood immediately. They were not just visiting him, they were protecting him, just as he had protected them. That day, Caleb realized something powerful. A single act of kindness had created a bond between him and a tribe many people feared. He had found friendship where others saw division, and because of that, his life and theirs would never be the same again.